And greetings to our friends on Free Speech TV as well. And we'll be talking to you, throughout the rest of the hour here. Newspapers. Newspapers are in trouble all across the United States. We were talking about this in the last segment about how the debt bomb has gone off in a lot of the nation's newspapers. They're going down in flames. On the other hand, there are many newspapers that are actually quite profitable and doing just fine, thank you very much. The question, are newspapers an important part of our commons? Should we, the people, be doing something to save them? And if so, what should we do to save them? What should that be? What should the steps be that we take? Dan Gainor is with us. He is the Vice President of the Business and Media Institute. Dan, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be back, Tom. I'm sorry I'm not on Skype. We actually ran into a ton of technical problems today.
Yeah, I know. It's been a funky day for that kind of thing. Businessandmedia.org, by the way, I should say, is your website, Dan. Are newspapers part of our commons in your mind?
Excuse me, I didn't hear you on that.
Are newspapers part of our commons in your mind?
No, newspapers are an essential part. They're the fourth estate, but they're best left out of the hands of government. And I mean, that's by and large been our history. Not universally, government's had its fingers in the pie.
It's not at all been our history, Dan. In the George Washington administration, they passed legislation subsidizing newspapers, both the manufactured newspapers, subsidizing the cost of newsprint. That stood until the 1830s, and subsidizing the cost of delivery, fourth-class postage rate, which stands till today.
Yeah, so they subsidize, but getting government actually involved in the funding of newspapers, which the vice president of the Washington Post called for literally this week, is not something that generally happens. We give a little bit of money to public radio, which basically you and your tax dollars are funding your competitors, which seems like you would probably not be real happy about that. And then for conservatives out there, we help with our tax-paying dollars. We help underwrite content that we don't agree with. And so
you don't agree with the news?
America. No, we don't like underwriting National Public Radio and PBS.
Okay, so, well, that's a separate argument. But let's talk about newspapers for a moment. Are we in agreement that it might be of some value that the government do something to save newspapers short of subsidizing them?
No, actually we're not. I think the best thing the government can do right now is stay the bloody hell out. Because if they don't, and they get involved, then you'll end up in a situation. I testified in front of Congress earlier this year about this very issue. You end up in a situation where publishers and people and journalists are going hat in hand to Congress asking for funding and help.
Right. Yeah, and that's not the way to do it. But what you're suggesting, Dan, for government to get out, for a marketplace to exist, there has to be government. Government creates marketplace. Government, courts enforce contracts. That's government. Laws are written that define the parameters of what can be in a contract. That's government. Jails are there for people who break contracts. That's government. The police departments are there to enforce them. Prosecutors are there. That's all government. You can't have a marketplace without government. And
I'm not going for anarchy, Tom. I'm just saying that when you go and ask for, as a couple lefties did, a bridge to the future of journalism that's $60 billion, that's not creating a marketplace.
Well, that's not. I don't disagree with you, Dan. I don't disagree with you at all. But here's my suggestion. Why not say that we're going to go back to the rules of the game as they were before Reagan? Before Reagan kicked open the doors to mergers and acquisitions and made it legal for companies basically to buy other companies and drop the debt for that purchase on the company that was purchased, which is what's been happening. All these mergers and acquisitions, the whole Michael Milken then all the way up to, Kravis, KKR and whatnot today, and Bain. This is how Mitt Romney made his millions. Why not simply make that illegal? Why not say you can't buy a company and dump the debt on the company that you just bought anymore? And for that matter, why not even take it a step further? Let's enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act and break up the big newspaper monopolies. Number one.
I don't want to.
Number two, let's require a certain percentage of local ownership for newspapers.
No, because again, then you're getting involved with who can own, who can publish, etc. That's not even a slippery slope. That's a cliff. What you really need to do is not do those things. Right now, the free market, and including in this case nonprofits, which go back to that point you were making about government creates some rules. Government has created a rule allowing for nonprofits. Nonprofits nationwide are going around solving this problem. We don't need to say the.
But what the free market has brought us, Dan, is like the Washington Times, where you've got a South Korean guy who thinks he's the reincarnation of Jesus, losing $2 billion over a 20-year period to make sure that everybody in Washington, D.C. has access to right-wing spin with the Washington Times.
I mean, are you personally offended by that?
I am. I'm suggesting.
The great thing about freedom of speech, Tom, the great thing about freedom of the press is anybody can publish.
I'm not opposed to that, but what I'm suggesting is that the so-called free market has reached a cancer stage with Mitt Romney making a fortune off companies getting stripped, basically, and newspapers are among them. We need to stop that.
No, we don't need to get government more involved in media. And if you look at these proposals, and the proposals are all coming from Democrats and the left, they're not coming from the right. Right doesn't.
No, because the right's got Reverend Moon with his billions of dollars.
You talk billions and billions of dollars on left-wing media, and we spend $400 million a year on NPR and PBS. That's by tax dollars.
NPR and PBS is not left-wing media, Dan.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It is. And I mean, let's
feel the same.
As I said, that's an entirely different. That's an entirely different argument. That we're talking about newspapers here, and our newspapers were working just fine in this country through recessions, through depressions, through financial panics. For 200 years, our newspapers were working just fine until Reagan changed the game of economics.
Newspapers
and they just became another commodity.
This wonderful invention called the Internet. And this thing about the Internet took away a lot of the major advertising categories that newspapers used to rely on.
Then why are so many newspapers still profitable?
They're not all that profitable. They used to be. They're profitable, but they're not anywhere near like they used to be.
Right. The ones that and therefore they can't handle the debt that they've been saddled with. So, Dan Gainor. No, we clearly haven't solved the problem in 8 minutes. But Dan, always good talking with you. Dan Gainor with the Business and Media Institute, businessandmedia.org. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Up next, should we save our newspapers? Are they important to democracy? Your thoughts.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
Program. And greetings also to our viewers on Free Speech TV on Dish Network. And 866-987-THOM is our telephone number, 866-987-THOM. If you'd like to participate in our discussion. Our newspaper's part of the commons. Our founders thought so. They subsidized newspapers dramatically. The Postal Service providing delivery of newspapers at a special fourth-class rate. Even today, a newspaper can be sent across the United States for a fraction of what it actually costs. We're still subsidizing newspapers. In the first 50 years of this republic, we subsidized the cost of the manufacture of newsprint so that newspapers could be cheaply produced, so anybody could go into the newspaper business. Earlier in the program, we had asked the question: is the Internet part of the commons? I would say it is also, and we need to be considering the Internet as part of our commons as well. So anyway, your thoughts on this subject? I think this is a pretty important one. 866-987-THOM. Should we? How do we legislate our way out of this, or back into rationality? Frankly, I think that's what it is, because our newspapers were not having a crisis until they started getting bought out by people who, frankly, didn't give a damn about the newspaper business. They just wanted to make money. Brian in, Cerritos, California? Hey, Brian, what's up?
We've chatted before. This is your favorite newspaper publisher.
Oh, okay, great. You publish a newspaper in Cerritos. That's
yeah,
right.
I have 45,000 a week, completely local.
Yep.
All local news and events.
And how you doing?
Good. We're doing fine here. We're very profitable. What we do is we have to do a bunch of different products. We don't just do the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
We work very closely with the school board here and things like that. So I realize that the newspaper business is shrinking, and certainly Craigslist and things like that were a big part of it.
Sure, yeah. Knocked out to the classified ad section as a profit revenue.
Right, but you can't get the news that we publish anywhere else but my newspaper or my website.
Right.
That's the competitive niche that we have.
Yeah, and that's the bottom line. The first rule in business is, what is your unfair competitive advantage? In other words, what is the thing that you do that nobody else can do? And then you always want to play to that, and you always want to work with that. And if you're a local newspaper and you're locally owned and you're providing local information, then hey, nobody else can do that unless they decide to directly compete with you, and then let it go on.
That's very difficult because usually the reporter I have is very entrenched with the city council and the people. He gets stories that nobody else will get, and we're in 8 different cities, and I'm actually getting ready to go into a 9th.
Yeah, well, that's great. Good on you, Brian. Thanks for the call and thanks for the heads up on that. Kay in Anchorage, Alaska. Hey, Kay, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Well, I'm enjoying your program this morning, and I probably have more a question rather than help you out with the newspaper print resource. But would you do a little update on our public resources as far as our airwaves? I thought the airwaves were publicly owned like our rivers and streams, and that FCC was supposed to manage them. And because of deregulation, instead of it being for the public good, as in truthful information so we can make intelligent decisions,
right,
it became more for corporate profit, which
right,
turned it into entertainment. And if I'm understanding it correctly, the internet is another wavelength, whether it's over the airwaves or whether it's fiber optic. And so technically you would think that would be something that you would think would be a nonprofit for the public good type enterprise,
or at
and
least
not for corporate profit.
Yeah, absolutely, Kay. Thank you very
Can
much.
you discuss some of that
I will riff on that.
deregulation?
I will riff on that right now because I think that
All
you've
right.
put your thumb. Thank you so much for the call and thanks for listening to us there in Anchorage. I think that you put your thumb on one of the really big issues. First of all, with regard to airwaves, radio and television, you can thank Ronald Reagan in 1987 for blowing up the Fairness Doctrine, which is a set of FCC regulations, and Bill Clinton in 1996 for signing the Telecommunications Act and the Republican Congress of 1996 for pushing it through, which put the nail in the coffin of the idea that broadcasters had to serve the public interest first and foremost. And that one of the most effective ways that they could do that was by providing news. And so they're no longer required to provide news. I mean, back in the 70s, when I was a newsman in radio for 7 years, I worked at WITL doing news in Lansing, Michigan, and that radio station lost money on the news operation. Why? Because that was the cost of keeping a license. We had to have news. I've done this rant before, so I'm not going to go on at length of repeating it. But with regard to the internet, I think it's the same thing. They're not going over the public airways, but they're going through public rights-of-way. And as long as the public rights-of-way are being used by and for the internet, those public rights-of-way, in other words, the cable lines are passing under streets, they're passing over telephone lines, things like this. It is our public rights-of-way that are being used for the internet. And as long as that's the case, we, the public, have some say in it. We were talking in the last hour about net neutrality. Or maybe it was 2 hours ago, I had a big debate about net neutrality. And the whole point about net neutrality is that there are companies that want to be able to say, we're going to slow down everything coming into your house except for the content of those people who pay us a little extra. So if Disney pays us extra, or if Drudge pays us extra, or if the New York Times pays us extra, then their pages will load much faster into your computer than Common Dreams or Free Speech TV's page or something, or a smaller organization that doesn't have the big bucks to pay us. And there are going to be hearings before the FCC. My understanding is they're scheduled for Thursday of this week and Tuesday of next week, and Congress is looking at this as well about legislative remedies for net neutrality. And there are some very powerful corporate interests that are saying, let's grab hold of the internet the way that over the last 20 years, the last 30 years nearly now, well, more than 87, the last 30 years that they've grabbed hold of the public airwaves of radio and television. And they're saying, how can we do this? How can we grab something here? How can we make this work? How can we snatch this? And it's a bad thing. I think that the internet is part of the commons. I think that the newspapers are part of the commons on a limited basis. And therefore, we need to protect them. There should be different rules for them than there are for somebody who's making shoes or somebody who's making computers or something like that, in my humble opinion. Alan in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, first of all, we really love you down here in Florida. It's been all
Thank you.
conservative talk radio. We really appreciate you now. My God, it's like a breath of fresh air.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was listening earlier. You guys were talking about the public option and I guess the Democrats' inability to market something. I agree wholeheartedly. I was thinking about this thing. I even talked to my grandmother about it. I said, why can't we call it something like Patriot Care, Medicare Part G?
Yeah.
For grandchildren and children of seniors who would rather pay their health care premiums into Medicare to ensure the solvency for the good of the country.
Yeah, this is why, Medicare Part E, I thought it up. Apparently I didn't. Dennis Kucinich used it as a campaign theme back in 2004. But he was suggesting that as a single payer, health care for everybody. And about a month ago, I wrote an op-ed for Common Dreams in which I said, well, we don't have single payer, and everybody's talking about this public option. Why don't we rebrand the public option as Medicare Part E?
Exactly.
And now you've got 3 members of Congress coming forward saying, hey, not a bad idea. So
exactly.
We'll see. We'll see where it goes.
I think, matter of fact, I talked to my grandmother about it because I was just concerned about it. I said, Grandma, I said, you guys, think about it. All you seniors are in the Medicare pool. All of y'all are sick. Y'all all are using now. Seniors should be screaming at the top of their lungs right now to get this so-called whole new pool of healthy people into their health care plan.
Right.
That will make it much cheaper for them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Alan, thank you very much for the call. Fred in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Tom, there's one factor that I don't think you're taking into consideration, and that's the fact, like, for instance, here in Arizona and Phoenix, the big newspaper is Arizona Republic, and it's an extreme right-wing newspaper. And there are a lot of people, a lot of liberals that won't buy it because what's the point? There's nothing good to be said about a liberal in that newspaper.
But there should be an opportunity for a liberal newspaper in the area too. And frankly, I would say if there isn't a liberal or progressive newspaper in the area, there's a business opportunity there.
I don't know if there is or not. There are several newspapers. For instance, there's a local free newspaper, the New Times, and.
Yeah. Well, this is what's happening increasingly as the weeklies, the community weeklies, they're filling that gap, and it's not a very healthy thing. And again, if you look at the consolidation of newspapers and the consolidation, the business consolidation that's happening all across this country, it's not a healthy thing. It's not a healthy thing for newspapers. It's not a healthy thing for the public dialogue. We need a healthy public dialogue. We need multiple points of view. And you're not going to get that by having this so-called free market, because there's no such thing as a free market. Marketplaces are created by government. And when you totally back off, it's like saying we're going to have a football game with no referees and no goalposts. It's not a game, it's anarchy. It's the law of the jungle. It's destructive ultimately. And not a good thing. Tom in Mount Clemens, Michigan. Hey Tom, welcome to the show. We got a minute to the break, Tom. What's up?
Okay, I wanted to thank you for having Suzanne Summers on and getting the alternative view, and I think that would go a long way to solving our health problems.
On cancer therapy in the last hour, sure. You're welcome.
Right. But as far as papers go, I think where you're a little off base is we've got to have a level playing field, and that's where the government was involved before Reagan. It was a level playing field. They didn't say, well, this market doesn't have a progressive newspaper, so we're going to help the progressives. No, they let the marketplace determine who was going to have the newspaper, but anybody who wanted to start a newspaper would get the benefits. Mm-hmm. And the government has to be the watchdog. I'm right. Where we've gone wrong, I think, in the past 20 years is the government watchdoggedness has gone.
Yeah, and that's the point. The purpose of government, thank you, Tom, is one of the main purposes of government is to protect the commons. The first 3 words of the Constitution, we the people, and it talks about the general welfare, the things that the government was created to do. Those things that we share in common, and Jefferson pointed out, if you don't have an educated populace, you can't have a functioning democratic republic.